Hello and welcome to Awkward Family Conversations, an intergenerational discussion of topics of interest to millennials and Zoomers. I am here with my father, Rhett, who for the past whole season, most of his bits of trivia about me have been about me being arty, but he has failed to mention that I get it from my crafty dad, who's been making pottery for many years and is actually the mastermind behind most of my dishware in my house. Hello, Dad.
Hi, Ed. And yeah, not been able to make pottery recently. My studio has been closed since March because of this COVID thing. So I definitely feel the lack of it. But it's nice to see you. I'm joined today by my younger daughter, Addie. And unbeknownst to her, almost certainly, her fantasy football team and mine are playing each other today in the Brat Fantasy Football, the BFF. And unless Patrick Mahomes goes crazy tomorrow night, I am likely to win our game here. So I'm very excited about that. And since she pays about as much attention to fantasy football as she does to probably quantum physics, maybe even less, actually.
Excuse me, I actually pay a lot of attention to quantum physics.
On a daily basis?
Yeah.
Okay, well then I stand, well, I was basically saying that, no, I guess I stand corrected. I stand corrected. You spend almost zero time thinking about fantasy football, only when I bring it up on very rare occasions.
I spend about as much time thinking about fantasy football as I do thinking about non-fantasy football.
I see, which is zero.
Yep.
You do have the Tennessee Titans defense on your team though, so there is that.
I think I fought some people for that one last year.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you have it. You didn't have to fight them this year, but you did get it. So
nice.
Very good. What is our topic today, Addie?
All right, well, today on our penultimate season 1 episode, we are discussing why lifelong learning is so important.
The lifelong learning, yes. So a lot of conversation about how important it is to have learning skills. And a lot of the workplace, a lot of companies are putting a real emphasis on making sure that you know how to learn, because there's the belief that our workplace is going to change pretty dramatically over the course of the next 10 to 20 to 30 years. And if you've got a career that's going to be 40 to 50 years long, that you will need to learn many things during that time period. So companies are anxious to make sure that they've got a workforce that is adaptable. And so you'll hear a lot of talk, a lot of buzz around adaptability and learning. So let me ask you, you've just gone through 16 years of learning, 17 if you count kindergarten, to prepare for the workplace. And you've been in the workplace now 4 months, 3 months?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a career type job. I mean, you've been in the workplace longer than that. What is your sense for the speed of change, the pace of change? Have you noticed any changes at all in the last 3 months in your work?
Well,
how you do your work, aside from, well, you started work after COVID, so.
I was gonna say that's quite the question to someone who started in a pandemic. I mean, yeah, we've had a lot of changes just from when I started, mostly with COVID things, in terms of like sending out papers beforehand for people to send us so we don't have to do all of the annoying questions over the phone. But I've seen a couple changes, but mostly like inconsequential things. But talking to doctors who maybe haven't worked at the practice that I work at for a couple years, but were there in the past, like they come back and they have no idea what the computer system is. And they figure it out because they're, doctors, highly educated, smart people.
Right.
But it's definitely interesting to see people who have maybe not even been there for less than a year, who are new to practices they've introduced in that time. So.
Yeah, but it's probably, even though those specific actions and the specific routines and processes are on the job, they're probably easy to figure out because they largely mirror what they were doing before. I mean, when you're a veterinarian, there are I'm guessing that what they need to record for each visit is probably not dramatically different.
It's just where you click to record it,
It's
really.
where you click to record it. And so the structure of what they have to do and what they have to record is changing. And so there's no question that there's a ton of things as you look at work. And there's no question that there's more opportunity, there's more things that are going to change around work than previous generations have had. And I'll say, so, let's talk about a few of those dimensions, or a few of those areas that could change and could create change in the workplace. The first thing is the world within which work happens is expected to change pretty dramatically here in the next 40 to 50 years. Over the course of what you can expect your career to be. We've got high birth rates in the emerging and developing worlds. You've got aging in the first world, so you've got the opposite problem in the developed economies. And that has tons of implications for work. The services for older people in the developing world are going to be in high demand. And so you're going to need things like medical care, things to ease people's ability to move around, to read or access information in different ways. So, those kind of things. So products that would help facilitate an aging population will be in demand in the developing world, in the developed world, in the first world as it's called. While in the developing world, you're going to need things like education, youth services, because you've got very high birth rates in a lot of these places around the world. And so depending where you are working in this world, you could see demand for different products and services emerge in different ways. We're going to have climate change is a massive shift in our world, and you're going to see a ton of migration. You're going to see people leaving the equator and moving north and south, and that's going to create. You're going to end up with these big cultural mashups that are going to happen, and for good and for ill. I mean, there's going to be a lot of problems with that, but. Just when I was in high school in Colorado, in Denver area, suburbs, we very homogenous, economically, racially, culturally, but you've seen with immigration and just an interest, people are able to travel more, so they come back to their towns, changed a little bit, and so. These migration things can have really big impacts in a lot of places. I mean, I never had Chinese food, Indian food growing up. And yet, if I go to Golden, Colorado today, I'm sure I can find more than one Indian restaurant would be my bet. More than one Chinese and maybe Thai restaurant as well. And so, those kind of, businesses will be in demand, and that will change local economies. We're also going to see, we're seeing a tremendous shift over the past 200 years. We've seen a tremendous shift to cities. In 1800, only 3% of the U.S. population lived in a city. Maybe that's a global. I'm not sure if that's U.S. or globally. Could be either. By 2050, we're expecting two out of every 3 people to live in the cities. And so you're talking about a big shift to urban areas and, leaving the countryside behind. In fact, here's an interesting tidbit I discovered during 2 minutes of internet research. Is when you look at California, the least populated county in California, which is the biggest state by population, is Alpine County, and they have 1.5 people per square mile. So if you can think of a square mile, 1.5 people in there. The most populous city is Los Angeles, and it's got about 10 million people, give or take. And it has, I think, 2,500 people per square mile. So you can see that, yeah, those are big numbers and big differences. So, you know, you can see Alpine County, by the way, is just south of Lake Tahoe. It's in the bend of where Nevada kicks towards Arizona, which is right where Lake Tahoe is. And so Alpine County in California is right below that. So it's not like this is the rural northeast of California up in the mountains. I mean, this is in the mountains, but it's, anyway, you're seeing this shift to the cities. And of course, what that means is that you're looking at denser populations. And so you're going to need things, products and services that are, you know, that allow for more people to be in closer quarters. So compact washers and dryers, for instance, you know, for apartment units, things like smaller refrigerators. So, you know, those, you know, you're going to see a lot of changes there. So there's a ton of stuff happening. And there's the global move, economic power moving to Asia. You know, China is going to become the predominant economy in the world probably over the next 30 to 40 years. And, you know, what that means, capital is going to be moving there. It's going to attract a lot of labor talent to work there. And so there's tons of implications there. So all, you know, these major demographic shifts, major environmental shifts, and then the government responses to them. You know, you're going to get tax policies, privacy legislations, economic safety net, pollution, other environmental things. There's going to be a lot of ways that governments are going to need to address the social and communal impacts that these big megatrends are going to create, and all of them can create changes in the workplace, because this is the environment in which you're working, the larger environment, the macro environment in which you're working, and that can exert a lot of pressure on your workplace which will create change that you'll need to adapt to, and that companies and organizations will need to adapt to. Another dimension that I think we need to think about. I mean, does that make sense to you before we jump into that one? I should check for understanding.
It do indeed.
Indeed. And what is, I mean, when you think about the next 30, 40 years and you think about the changes that are in the offing, not that you're going to know all of them, but what do you think is going to be the biggest impact or the biggest thing that a workplace is going to need to adapt to?
I mean, climate change is kind of the thing for me. That's the thing I see affecting us most thoroughly, because that's going to affect populations. People are going to move inland. People are going to leave. Populations are going to get more condensed in more places as they evacuate others. And then also on top of that, like, hopefully anyway, there's going to be regulations and expectations culturally and governmentally that businesses then need to change to. I know, like, even there's not much we can do in the medical field, even veterinary medicine, to reduce our plastic waste in order to, you know, keep everything sterile. But that definitely is something that I think about, is like how much plastic we go through on a daily basis, and how that is something that should be addressed, and hopefully soon. So that's going to be a big change, and that's going to affect then in turn, because there's not as many subsidies for plastic substitutes as there are necessarily plastics. It's not as cheap to produce. Then we're going to have to change how we pay people and what we charge for services. So I really see climate change being the biggest change factor in all of it, because that's going to
agree.
all those areas.
That's going to touch everything we do, and it will have implications far beyond kind of what we can even imagine here. I mean, you know, as you get people moving out, I mean, you can look at Syria as probably the first big migration caused by climate. I mean, they've got a very unstable, cruel government that's starving people and moving them out. But this has also corresponded the last 10 years, and the challenge in Syria has also corresponded with tremendously bad droughts and heat that have made agriculture virtually impossible and destroyed agriculture, and so people were starving, and that will cause people to move, and think about how bad your life would have to be for you to abandon everything that's familiar to you and go somewhere where it's I mean, there's a lot of risk in doing that, and people are doing that on a massive scale. And so, I've seen the Syrian, the crisis in Syria called the first big climate change created migration. And, that's sadly going to be the case for a lot of places around the center of the world. And they'll move north and they'll move south, but they'll move because they have to survive. And that's going to put them in conflict, as the Syrian migration has in the various places they've gone. That's going to put them in conflict with people who are already there and don't want to have more people to compete with for their resources of time, space, goods, air. They don't want the cultural conflicts. They want things the way they are, and they don't want to have to adapt. And so there's going to be a lot of conflicts and opportunities for people to recognize, okay, we're, let's get creative and let's find solutions to these issues. And I think, one of the things that business and particularly in capitalist economies is very good at is identifying needs. And so what you identified with the plastics, for instance, you can reduce the amount of plastics that you're creating, or you can learn to create those plastics and give you that same sterilization with a lower footprint, or you can look to recycle find ways to recycle the plastic that you are otherwise throwing away. And so there's a lot of different ways, and you'll see a lot of different companies try to address those pieces because, in a capitalist economy, that's how they make money. They create value. And that's, and so they identify needs and then move to fill them. And so, I think you're absolutely right. I think climate change is going to be the big story of the next 50 years. And I think it will affect everything we do, and it will definitely affect the workplace in a lot of different ways as well. But that's not the only thing, that external environment is not the only thing that's going to create pressure for change in companies or in organizations. If you're working in nonprofits or wherever you're working, changes to how you work is, I think, going to be equally, we'll call it disruptive because that's a cool buzzword, but it's going to be, you're seeing in the workplace already, and I think you'll just continue to see this grow, move towards flexibility in all its dimensions. We work in a flex workspace, so your physical workspace, and maybe it's not your office. Maybe you share that office, and you come in, use it once a week, and somebody else comes in, uses it the next day, and so a third person comes in and uses it the third day. So you're going to see, in the same way you're seeing shared cars and rides and homes, and you've got Uber, and you've got Airbnb, and you've got Zipcar, and all these things are really just shared resources, making them more efficient. One of the most stunning statistics I ever saw was that 92% of cars are parked at any one time, any 1 minute, 92%. So for the cost of, for the sake of convenience, we're accepting a 92% inefficiency rate. And you're never going to get to 100% efficiency, but you can probably get to a 25 to 30% efficiency rate or inefficiency rate. So you could probably have about a third less cars than you have right now and still get everybody where they needed to go when they needed to go. You'd have to do the analysis around peak times and when people are using it and make sure you have enough, you have solutions for people in all those different conditions. But I think you're going to see this shared piece, and it's going to extend to companies too. They're not going to hire you as a project manager to be on staff all the time, 100%. They're going to hire you to do a project, and then if they have another project and they like what you're doing, they'll hire you to do that. But if they don't, then you'll do what the consultants call go on the beach, and you'll be, you won't be working until there's a new project. And you won't have one employer, you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 different employers that you use that will bring you on as needed. And so, you're already seeing some of this in some industries more than others. But I think that kind of trend will continue. So this flexibility, not just, and employees are demanding flexibility as well, right? They're demanding, time to take vacations that matter. They're looking for, they're not really interested in dress codes. I think we talked last week or the week before. My day was pretty prescribed to me when I started my career 35 years ago. It was, you show up at 7:30 in the morning and you work till 4:30 take an hour for lunch. And you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of, well, maybe you get into 7:45, but then you're expected to stay to 4:45. You got to put in your 9 hours, and you get that hour for lunch, and you can take your lunch at 11:30 if you want, or if you want to take it at 12:15, you can take that. But there wasn't a lot of discretion. Dress code was prescribed as well. I needed to be in at least a sport coat. Suit would be better. Had to wear a tie. That was the way it was. And, those kind of trains are going to go by they already have gone by the wayside for the most part. You still see companies that do demand that, but workers are saying, no, I'm not going to work for companies like that. And so those things are going away. I mean, I remember, kind of when in a company, I was working at Pacific Bell at the time when we made the transition to full-time casual wear, and it took a couple of people. I was an early adopter. I wasn't a leader. I wasn't one of the first two, but I was probably third in terms of the people that I'm remembering who just said, you know what, I'm not wearing a tie anymore, and just started coming into work without a tie. And there was a little bit of risk, and you could see some people were like, whoa, what's up with that? But it didn't take very long after that before kind of that became the thing. But we weren't wearing jeans, and we weren't wearing flip-flops, which you'll see in the workplace today. Very casual. So employees are asking for a lot more flexibility. Employers are going to be using a lot more flexibility. In my career, I've worked over 30-ish years, 35 years. I've worked at 6 different companies, I think. So an average of, I was moving on an average of six years. I'd move. That's going to be that was pretty high. I looked at your grandfather. I mean, he probably worked at 3 companies his career, 40 years. That turnover is going to happen. You're not going to have those long tenured people at companies typically. What's that?
I'm a old soul at heart. I like to know what's going to happen. It's funny listening to you talk about how things are changing, because I'm like, well, we have a prescribed dress code of scrubs. I'm told to get there at 6:45 in the morning, and I can leave at 6:45 at night. Or I can get there at 8 in the morning and leave at 8 at night. And
you've got, I'm talking about, my corporate work. I had no clients, right? I didn't have anybody who was going to be there. I didn't have hours, right? I mean, not hours that people would be coming in. If you're in retail, and if you're in a customer facing position, you have to be available when your customers are.
Yeah. But even then, it's like most of the retail jobs I've worked, there's a loose dress code, or you're either the AM shift or the PM shift, and sometimes you're both, and it's kind of like weird, but it's nice working a full-time job where I get regular hours and there's an expected dress code. But speaking of the dress code, we have in Nashville what we like to call music business casual, which means if I put a tailor jacket on over this t-shirt and a pair of jeans and like some Vans, I could go to a job interview and look good.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't the case when I was interviewing for jobs. You needed to be in a suit or certainly a tie, and either a sport coat or a suit. And so, yeah. What's that?
I wore a tailor jacket to one of my vet interviews, and the amount of doctors that were like, why can't we all dress like this every day? I was like, is this weird? I'm just trying to look nice.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. So anyway, flexibility is going to be demanded on both the part of the employer and employee, and that's a change. That's a change from generations that have gone before. So you're going to have more gig work. You're going to have more employers. Where you work is going to be more flexible. Not if you're in a vet clinic, obviously, but if you're doing marketing, or if you're an operations analyst, or you're going to have a lot more flexibility about where to work, whether that's from home, whether that's from going into the office if you want, or if there's going to be a local office or a regional office that you'll work out of. So you're going to see a lot more like that, and you're going to see distributed talent pools. I mean, one of the things that globalization allows, and globalization meaning you've got the technology that supports work being able to be moved. Which it can be now digitally. You moved a lot more easily around the world. You can find people that can do that kind of knowledge work You can find them all over the world, and you're not going to be constrained by who you can hire locally. You can now hire people all over the country and all over the state and all over the world if you want to. Again, for knowledge type work, and a lot of the work is knowledge based. So flexibility is going to be something that is new to your generation in the workplace. This level of flexibility. So that's going to put pressure on how work gets done.
Well, you can see it even already in the veterinary field. Like, yes, there's prescribed hours and a dress code that's expected, and that's normal. But talking to one of my coworkers, she was out in like rural Massachusetts until this job that she's working now in Nashville. And I was like, why'd you come here? And she was like, I got the job. And I was like, why'd you apply? She was like, because if you want a job in the veterinary field, you have to be willing to move anywhere.
Okay.
And like, that's what I've talked to from most of my coworkers, volunteering at Walden's Puddle, the wildlife rehab center. A lot of them came from like North Carolina, or had a competing job offer in Delaware when they graduated school in Alaska.
Yeah.
So it's, even that is already the flexibility thing, is you kind of have to be willing to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's been true to a degree previously. I mean, if you wanted to work in financial services, you needed to work in New York. Used to be, but now there are companies, California, obviously, Hong Kong, London. There's a lot of now different places that you can go to work in those places. And you're right. While knowledge work can come to you, it's also possible that, especially for jobs like yours, where you need to be where the animals are sick and where the demand is. That's where you got to go. And I'm reminded when you worked at the Lindsay Wildlife Museum in school, here in high school and junior high, you had people that came from all over the country to work there. Mm-hmm. Right. So, so in addition to the gig work and flexibility, changes to the tools you use. And you alluded to this earlier when you said, you can be out of the workplace, 9 months, come back after, maternity leave, and your computer system will have changed, and you're going to have to learn a whole new way of entering your patient information, because the tools you use have changed. Either you've got a new software, or the software's been upgraded, and there's been functionality changes and enhancements that have happened, new versions of stuff being released all the time, getting new hardware. I mean, that kind of technology, which is large. I mean, the tools that we're talking about here are just the physical tools that you are using individually, but there's also going to be things like machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence, that's going to come through. It's going to make the machines smarter and able to do more than they currently do today. And so they'll offload a lot of what people are doing today, especially the mechanical or the repeatable type work, or the highly structured work can be moved off more efficiently to machines. You might see biomedicine stuff come out. By the way, all of this stuff is coming out of something I read from Baker McKenzie, and they put on a global employee forum called FutureWorks in 2017. I read the summary of this, and it was fascinating stuff. So, but they talked about biomedicine, and caffeine is an example of an enhancer, right? And we want a drug-free workplace, but what if some of the drugs are enhance your ability to do your job without negative side effects? Is that the kind of thing that you want to allow in the workplace so that you can be more alert and more productive?
I can tell you, nobody is getting anything done in a vet field where you work 12-hour days if they take away the coffee machine.
I think that may be true in just about any workplace you can think of. We go through a ton of coffee at our workplace too. Caffeine is one of those things, but it's an example of an enhancer, and there's going to be more, that come out. A lot of the drugs that they're using to treat specific conditions for attention. So things like ADHD and things, it's at lower doses, those could be effective in helping people, be able to focus better and therefore deliver more production. And so it'll be interesting to sort of see how that affects the workplace.
This is the craziest conversation I've ever had with Rhett Brett.
Oh, well, it's just, I'm telling you, these guys, Baker McKenzie, fascinating. Read it, look it up, Google it. We'll put the link on our website, blog, and on the YouTube and our YouTube channel for this episode. But it was really an interesting. It was just a summary and outline of what they discussed. But was very cool. And then of course you've got automation and robotics. I mean, as machines get more dexterous and able to do things, more effectively, that are finer, require finer motor skills as they develop that capability. You're going to see a lot of work and move to those now more capable machines. And so there's a lot, there's a lot in terms of the changes to the tools. It's going to change the workplace as well. And then there's going to be changes to the way industries work. I mean, we're already seeing, you're going to, companies are going to, I think industries are going to coalesce around standards. They already do in a lot of ways, but I think you're going to see just more of that trend that, if you're a box manufacturer, you're going to produce, you're going to come up with a set of standards for boxes that, you'll produce so that, you'll be competing not on the size of your box, but on different things. Just because the standards make it easier for companies to deliver their services more efficiently. And cost is always going to be a consideration when you're talking about purchasing decisions, whether you're a household or whether you're a company. And having standards means that there'll be less choice, but then that means less customization. Less customization means cheaper prices, and you're able to drive your costs of production down because you don't have to try to accommodate a whole bunch of special orders. And then you'll have smaller companies that will exist to just deliver customized applications, customized products in different ways. So I think you're going to see this move to standardization. But what does that mean? If you're selling the same box as everybody else, same size box, then what are you competing on? So you're competing now on delivery time, competing now on brand values. If you're going to a consumer marketplace, brand, what does your brand stand for, and how are you, are you supporting efforts to address climate change? These things are becoming these questions were never asked 10, 20, 15, 30 years ago. I mean, it really would. This idea that a company has a social obligation isn't new, but it's new in terms of the number of people who are demanding to know what the company stands for and how it backs up those words. And so, we're still in fairly early stages of this, but I think your generation in particular, the millennials and Gen Z folks, are really going to demand more of their consumer companies to say, look, we're all connected in this world. What do you stand for? And are you part of my ecosystem or not? And so that's where companies will compete. They won't compete on different as much. They won't compete as much on different features. They'll compete on innovation. They'll compete on company values and how much, they'll want to create a community of consumers around them who are incredibly loyal. And, companies have been doing that brand loyalty for a long time. Coke and Pepsi have gone back and forth for decades, trying to create those communities that will drink one or the other, but not one of them, but not the other. And, that was, just in one dimension, but I think you're seeing there are going to be a lot more dimensions that companies will try to set themselves apart and try to create that group of loyal customers that they will then deliver their services to. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that. So all of these different dimensions are going to exert a lot of pressure on the workplace. And that's where you're going to see changes. And this is back to your, the question about why is lifelong learning such a big deal, is because if you've got your external environment changing, and we haven't even talked about the internal cultural changes and things for companies, but the way you work is changing, the tools you work with are changing, the way your industry interacts with the world and presents itself to its market is changing. You're going to need to adapt in a job. You're going to need to adapt on a regular basis to how your company and how your role are changing. And we haven't, and probably the thing that's going to change a lot is also you. I mean, and we talked about this in previous episodes. As you get more skilled in your work, you're going to want to do different things. You're going to want to change what you do. You're going to want more responsibility. You're going to want tougher decisions to make that require more knowledge and more awareness. You're not going to be satisfied doing the same thing over and over and over again indefinitely. Very few people are, and so. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of change. So when companies start talking about lifelong learning and why it's important to be able to learn how to learn so that you can, gain skills in acquiring information, synthesizing information, and then crystallizing takeaways from it. That's kind of what they're talking about is, we're going to have all this change that's going to happen. It's going to affect the workplace, and we want people who can adapt in that workplace to all of those changes so that they can continue to deliver what we need. And so, how does that make you feel? All those changes coming?
Nervous.
Yeah.
Nervous, but also excited. One of the reasons I really like what I do is because it's something new every day, and I love school and I like learning. So it's nerve-wracking because I'm not the biggest fan of uncertainty and upheaval, but it's also kind of comforting to know that like I'm never gonna be bored and stuck in a rut, and there's always gonna be something else to learn, something else to figure out, and something to get better at, which is nice because that's really kind of what keeps me wanting to come back to work in the morning is like, oh, now I get to practice this thing. So.
Well, I have good news for you. Because while it is true that all of these changes will create the need, just as you talked about, you go away for 9 months and you come back and you've got to learn how to enter this information, right? But it's also true that it's not fundamentally changing your job and how you deliver your services, right? Your doctor, your vet comes back and, okay, I've got a new software system where I need to enter my records, but it's not fundamentally changing the nature of the work that veterinarian has to do, right? They're still doing what they learned in vet school, probably.
Yeah, and there's a lot of soft skills.
What's that?
There's a lot of soft skills that come into it too. Like the world changes, people don't really change that much. So my 6 years of food service before this job are pretty much always going to be relevant in terms of dealing with people on a daily basis.
Right. And how people are going to change, right? I mean, part of the motivation behind our discussions here is this generational shift that's happening in the workplace where you have older people leaving and they have different values, different ways of approaching their work, different, just how they are, how they behave, how they've learned. And you interact different with those people than you will with the people that follow you in the workplace. And so you're right. The workplace, it's the river that you can never step in the stream in the same place again, and that's true everywhere, and it's true at work as well. And you're right. You're going to learn things that will always be relevant to your job. And so, Greg Collins is this. I think he's a PhD. He's a doctor of some sort anyway. He wrote a nice column in trainingindustry.com website, and he was talking about how, and he quoted Paul Krugman, who's one of my favorite economists, brilliant guy, and also pretty direct communicator and makes his ideas very accessible. So I very much appreciate that. So if you're not reading Paul Krugman, you should. He's a columnist with the New York Times, but he's so much more than that, including a Nobel Prize winner in economics. So he's as good as they get in terms of economic thought, and he has a perspective, and not everybody's going to agree with everything he says, but you can't. He is amazing. But he made the point too, and he was one of the experts that Dr. Collins quoted in this thing, where he says, we've been saying the pace of change is accelerating. We have said it in the 1800s, we said it in the early 1900s, we said it in the mid 1900s, we've said it in the late 1900s, and now we're saying it in the 2000s. And guess what? Depending how you define change, and he says, look at my grandfather. He, was born around the turn of the century in 1900-ish. And, the primary mode of transportation at that time would have been a horse and buggy, or a horse, or a steamship, or a train. And he saw the rise of the automobile. He saw the rise of radio and television. So it changed the way the world communicated and distributed information. He saw the exodus from central cities out into suburbs, this big population migration out of urban areas into suburban areas. Saw airplanes come into view, saw a man walk on the moon. He says, I was born 1945. basically, aside from the internet, all of those things were already invented by the time, when I was born. What has really fundamentally changed in my lifetime relative to my grandfather's lifetime is not a whole lot. And so I think we can get overwhelmed at times when you think about all the things that are changing and think, oh my God, that's going to upend the world as we know it. When in fact, like you said earlier, a lot of this stuff is, I don't know, you didn't use superficial, but it was, or maybe you did. We can go back and check the tape. But it was, these things are not central to the work that you're doing. And in fact, the World Bank has published a study that showed that actually, so you'd expect changes in the workplace to create increases in productivity, because otherwise, why would you do that, right? You would want you're gonna adapt your processes and your policies and your training and the role and what you expect from your employees to create more product or better product for less, for less cost. And so, the measure that they use for productivity growth is they take gross domestic product, which is the output of an entire economy in dollar terms, and they divide it by a labor unit. And since we had tremendous productivity growth up until about 1970, where it kind of slowed up into the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and it's actually declined. The rate of growth has declined since then. So now, part of the reason you have to change is maybe, your productivity growth may not be growing, but you still may need to change to maintain the current productivity growth, which is maybe an area. I'm sure these guys are very smart. I'm sure probably they've thought about it, but in my 2 minutes of internet research, I was not able to see where they had accounted for that possibility that you need to make that the change and the pace of change has to be such that you're just running faster just to stay even. And but it is a split too, that the industrialized world, the first world economies, the developed economies are actually there's negative growth, whereas in the emerging and developing economies you're seeing higher growth, and that's not totally unexpected, because there's going to be more opportunities in these less developed countries to have significant improvements relative to what you. In other words, the industrialized economy's probably base is much larger, so to have a percentage growth on a large base is harder than percentage growth on a small base. If you're looking for the same kind of growth, the efforts can yield tremendously different results. But anyway, the good news is that your skills and your knowledge that you're building are not going to be obsolete. You're not going to have to, the money that we spent to send you to college is not going to be wasted. That you will retain those knowledge, the skills that you learned in 6 years of food service will continue to serve you well, and you'll just build on that as changes happen in the workplace. They're not going to fundamentally alter in the short term or even the medium term, probably, the way you do your work, but it will over time. 40, 50 years of a career is a long time, and you'll see big shifts over that time, but they won't be industry. There won't be, they won't be across every industry. They won't be across every company. But what you will see is that these changes, these smaller changes that are constantly going to be happening, you'll need to be adaptive. You'll need to be able to sort of figure out how to be in this new place. But that kind of thing has actually been going on for a long, long time. As I've described some of my changes in my career that I've gone through. You do have to. Every day is bringing you something a little bit different, and you need to be able to adapt to it. So in that sense, the ability to learn is a good thing, and it is necessary, but it's not anything that you need to worry about that, I've just invested a whole lot of money in education and now it's worthless. That's never going to be the case. It hasn't been the case. And so, knowing how to learn things, and again, that's kind of how to access information and absorb it, synthesize it, and crystallize some learnings from it. Those are skills that will serve you well. And if you have a curiosity and a mindset that you can always enhance yourself, that you can always learn something new and be better than you are, that can be really effective. And one, it's fun. And like you say, you like to learn new things. If you're a curious person and you're interested in the world, and there's so much to learn. it's great. But what that'll do is what you learn will just continue to build on your skills and knowledge. It's not gonna replace what you had. What you learned all previously is not gonna be obsolete. So lifelong learning, important to be able to learn. It's important to be able to be adaptive and to absorb change, because that stuff does definitely happen. But it's not. It's nothing to be afraid of, and it's nothing that is going to change the way. It's probably a big kerfuffle of over not much, tempest in a teapot kind of thing. As you worry about losing or having what you've already learned be obsolete, that's just not the way it's going to be. So hopefully you can put your mind at ease a little bit and know that that's while it's a great thing to have, and it's a great thing to use to build your skills. It's you don't worry, don't lose sleep over the fact that what you've already learned is ultimately a sunk cost that you're never going to get anything back on. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I do.
Very good. So I think that's it for today.
That is it for today.
All right. And we were very good. We watched our language.
That we were.
And
we
do
did
we have
not watch the clock, but we did watch our language.
Exactly. And yeah, so no Venmo today. And then anything that we need to research? Is there any? I will take a look. I will look to see if there was a pace of change. If there's something in the World Bank productivity measures that would suggest that maybe people just need to change just to stay even. But other than that, I think we're probably good.
All right. Well, in that case, our loyal fans can find us on awkwardfamilyconversations.com, on Twitter at awkwardfamilyc1, on YouTube and Facebook, also at Awkward Family Conversations, and on Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, or wherever else you like to listen. Also at Awkward Family Conversations. Let us know what you think via comments or text messages. Our superfan Mike left us high and dry this week. A little sad about it.
Yes, he did.
And next week in our season 1 finale, we will tackle our unreleased pilot of Why Is My Boss Such a Jerk?
Yes, the age-old question. Sounds good.
I can't relate, but.
No, but your sister can. All right, my love. We will talk to you soon.
All right. I love you, Dad.
I love you too. Bye-bye.